Luffy's battle with Kaido is about to conclude. Onigashima battle, the Straw Hat Pirates are winning by a landslide. Although Luffy's dance is indeed eye-catching, the biggest contributor in all this is none other than our dear brother Zoro. Today, we'll take a closer look at Zoro's dazzling performance in the Onigashima battle. Let's see how the strongest vice captain took on 2 Yonko and defeated the second boss, Jinbe. At the beginning of the Onigashima battle, Zoro had a very clear goal in mind. Capture the leader first. Take down Kaido directly and end the entire fight. So he ascended to the rooftop and faced Kaido alongside Luffy, Law, and Kid. While Kaido and Big Mom ganged up on Luffy, Zoro was right behind him, and he sliced Prometheus with a single strike. That was Kinemon's Flame Rend technique that Zoro had learned. While Luffy, Kid, and Law were busy joking around, Zoro and Killer took the initiative against Kaido. Kaido wielded his club, and Zoro transformed into a green flash. Although he managed to cut Kaido, it was a shallow wound, not causing substantial damage to Kaido. After the captains finished their jokes, they focused on dealing with Kaido. It seemed like their flashy moves were just giving Kaido a massage. Luffy was about to get hit by Kaido's heat breath, and that's when Zoro took action. Though reluctant, Trafalgar Law followed through. For the sake of the greater good, Law used Room to send Zoro in front of Luffy. With a single strike, Zoro split Kaido's fiery breath, leaving Luffy in awe. Then Law precisely positioned Zoro again, this time on top of Kaido's head. Zoro gathered his haki into the sword, and Big Mom sensed danger. Zoro had no intention of giving Kaido a chance to evade. Kaido stared at Zoro. The sword seemed somewhat familiar to him. Kaido widened his eyes. That's Enma. Zoro sliced a piece off Onimaru's skull, not hitting Kaido directly, but it did leave a significant impact. Why does that guy's sword have the aura of Enma? Seeing this, Big Mom used Thunder Bagua, striking Zoro out of the air, followed by a lightning storm. Zoro got up and ran without hesitation, but he couldn't outrun the lightning. Everyone was struck by Big Mom's lightning, except for Luffy, who was unaffected due to his devil fruit power. So, Luffy briefly took the lead, facing Kaido alone. But just when Luffy was confident and high-spirited, his fourth gear suddenly deflated, and he couldn't use haki for 10 minutes. Kaido took advantage and swung down his club. Luckily, Zoro was quick to react, darting through the flames to rescue Luffy. Kaido created a tornado, and both Zoro and Luffy were pulled in. Kaido lunged forward and swallowed Luffy whole. Enraged, Zoro drew his swords, and his aura transformed into a massive dragon. He confronted Kaido. Zoro created a tornado almost on par with Kaido's, and cut Kaido, saving Luffy. At this point, Kaido finally recognized the sword in Zoro's hand, the blade that had once wounded him. Enma, the legendary sword. Using a tornado to challenge me? This guy has no idea what he's messing with. Kaido unleashed an enhanced version of the tornado, the Tornado Bad Wind, which included green-bladed projectiles. Zoro carried Luffy and ran, but Kaido transformed into his more monstrous form. Luffy had only 1 minute left to recover. Zoro declared, "Leave it to me." Killer volunteered to take the lead, but Kaido swiftly defeated him. Big Mom couldn't resist joining the fight. Law used Room to relocate Luffy and Zoro, just in time for Luffy's recovery. The Scabbards, however, were all lying defeated on the ground, victims of Big Mom's thunderstorm. Kaido and Big Mom stood side by side, resembling twin stars from hell. Both Yonko raised their weapons together, unleashing their most devastating attack, a power akin to a comet striking the earth. Even Law's abilities couldn't relocate everyone in time. It seemed like they were on the verge of annihilation, but Zoro rushed to the front. Zoro single-handedly withstood the devastating attack from both Yonko. This act solidified his position as the strongest vice captain. Zoro's sacrifice averted the crisis, but he paid a heavy price, suffering severe injuries. Luffy, witnessing Zoro's sacrifice, grew furious. He faced off against Kaido once more, but was quickly overpowered. Then Kaido and Big Mom joined forces again. The Scabbards attempted to help, but they were all incapacitated. Kaido mocked Luffy, "Is this all you've got, you little brat?" Kaido's club crackled with lightning, as he prepared to deliver a fatal blow to Luffy. Once again, Zoro stepped forward. "Wait a minute. If you're going to take our captain to hell, take me with you." Luffy stood up to shield Zoro from Kaido's attack, and they continued their battle with unwavering. Law and Kid exchanged knowing glances, and locked Zeus in a small room. Zoro and Killer teamed up, slicing Prometheus and Napoleon in half. Then Law used his Room ability to hurl Big Mom out with a stone. Zoro charged forward, slashing the ground beneath Big Mom's feet, leaving her with no foothold as she plummeted down on Onigashima. Prometheus rushed to save Big Mom, and Zoro followed closely, striking at his heels. Law couldn't help but admire Zoro's resilience, taking on the 4 Emperors like it was no big deal. At this point, Kaido shook off Luffy, and rushed to rescue Prometheus. Law acted swiftly, moving Zoro aside and temporarily holding off Kaido. Prometheus took the opportunity to fly down to Onigashima, saving Big Mom. Then Zoro unsheathed his sword once more, taking aim at Kaido. It was time for his ultimate strike. Endless battles only led to exhaustion. If this attack failed, it would be his end. Leave the rest to you, Zoro told Kaido. Preparing for his ultimate move, Zoro unleashed his ultimate technique, transforming into a three-headed, six-armed warrior, and clashed blades with Kaido. After a fierce exchange, Zoro's strike caused Kaido's old wound to bleed profusely. Zoro was on the brink of collapse. Kaido touched his wound in disbelief. Could it be, you possess Conqueror's Haki too? Zoro claimed he had no memory of such a thing. But this would be his final strike. Even a man as strong as Shura had to kneel before him. Kaido acknowledged, that wound you've left behind will be your bragging right for life. Kaido approached Zoro. And Law was ready to intervene. But Kaido swiftly used Raiden Bagua, instantly defeating both of them. If only you had joined me, we could have ruled the world together. That marked the end of Zoro's battle on the rooftop. The stage was now set for Luffy. Zoro exited temporarily, and Law brought him beneath the rooftop to Sanji. Sanji casually wrapped Zoro up like a mummy, and Zoro fell asleep instantly. No matter how severe his injuries, a good nap would fix him right up. Afterward, the Mink tribe's doctor administered a super adrenaline shot to Zoro, transforming him into a beastly man. Meanwhile, Sanji was left alone to face both Queen and King, the two bosses. From Queen and King's perspective, Sanji appeared as tiny as an ant, and struggling against both Vice Emperors was a challenge. Sanji got some help from Drake for a while, but Drake couldn't hold out due to fatigue. Just as things were looking dire, Drake surrendered, declaring he had already had his fun. And then Queen fired an M87 beam at Drake, who calmly adjusted his glasses. Zoro leaped out from behind Drake, and sliced through Queen's M87 beam, announcing his arrival. He's here. He's coming with his sword. Sanji powered up into his raid suit, and King's arm ignited in flames, while his black wings unfurled. Zoro prepared for his ultimate three-sword strike, and the battle to protect the two emperors began. Zoro took the initiative against King, but King's sword suddenly transformed, the blade turning into giant teeth that locked onto Zoro's swords. Zoro couldn't pull away in time, and King slightly twisted the blades, sending two of Zoro's swords flying. Then, King's knuckle dusters with rivets shot out, landing a punch that sent Zoro flying. King wasn't just a swordsman, he was an all-around fighter. Zoro reached for the Sandai Kitetsu, and though he was roughly the same height as King's knee, he fought without losing ground. A clash of blades ensued, back and forth, but King remained unimpressed. In his mind, they were invincible, and no one could defeat them. No matter how many times they fought, the outcome was always the same. But the rising tide will always surpass the one before. King didn't intend to give Zoro any respite. Sparks flew as they dueled. Zoro broke King's defenses with a relentless attack, taking a piece of the mask from King's face. King was shocked. Not just shocked, but deeply humiliated. His eyes reddened with anger, staring fiercely at Zoro. Zoro thought King was in pain and shouted, "Is that spike still connected to your nerves?" Zoro's mocking words infuriated King. His entire body ignited in flames, transforming into a toothless, winged dinosaur form. He launched blade-like projectiles from his wings at Zoro, showing off his skills. Zoro couldn't believe that behind the stoic mask lay such a goofball. Cinder swooped down. With a sharp, pointed claw, Zoro thrust at Zoro. Flames engulfed the two of them. Zoro swung his dual swords fiercely, temporarily pushing Cinder back. Cinder spiraled in the air. Zoro gasped for breath, not knowing what bizarre move this big bird was going to make next. Sure enough, the aloof Cinder once again revealed his goofy side. He used the expression pack skill, directly transformed his form and hovered in the sky, while using one claw to pull his head forcefully backward. His entire head was twisted and deformed. Even Zoro was shocked. This guy was even more absurd than Luffy, twisting that crest into a pile of dung. What was he trying to do this time? Cinder stretched the laser to its limit and suddenly let go. His head acted like a slingshot. A black beam of light shot down at an incredible speed, creating a huge crater in the ground. Zoro exclaimed, although it looked ridiculous. The power of this move was not to be underestimated. It was just like a laser beam. Cinder earnestly told Zoro that this was how shameless pterodactyls hunted. Those who understood shameless pterodactyls, and those who didn't, all fell silent. Some well-read folks might say, impossible. Absolutely impossible. To which Cinder believed that people and their physical constitutions were different, just as the bodies of dragons varied. Zoro remained dumbfounded. Indeed, where there were dragons, there were phoenixes. Cinder transformed into a thundering warplane in the air. Another round of aerial strafing ensued. Zoro ran while desperately brainstorming ways to deal with it. He had to bring Cinder down. Otherwise, he would just be worn down. After careful observation, Zoro noticed that gold flames were burning on Cinder's back. Illiterate Zoro was puzzled. Did the burning back also signify shameless pterodactyl's characteristics? Cinder sincerely told Zoro. No. Cinder roared past. Zoro stood firm, wielding his 3 swords. Today, he had to bring Cinder down. Zoro's body was surrounded by ghostly energy. The earth couldn't withstand the wind pressure from Zoro's ghostly aura. It was crushed. The powerful Onamaru transformed into a purple dragon. Zoro swung his 3 swords, creating a massive tornado. The tornado engulfed Cinder. Cinder protected his body with his 2 wings that seemed like iron plates. Taking on the sword winds of the tornado, Zoro realized that something was amiss. This guy was unusually tough. So, were all dinosaurs known for being tough? Cinder answered Zoro sincerely. Indeed, dinosaurs were known for being tough. But he was even tougher than the average dinosaur. Cinder drew his massive cleaver, leaning down from a higher position. He brought the blade down forcefully, pressing it against Zoro's sword. Let's settle this with our swords. The 2 of them engaged in a fierce contest. The clanging of metal rubbing against metal filled the air. As Zoro clashed swords with Cinder, he pondered the previous battle. In that recent skirmish, his attacks did indeed land on Cinder many times. Yet, this guy hadn't shed a drop of blood. Zoro analyzed that he was definitely not a human species. It must be some kind of ability from a race he didn't know about. Cinder's swing sent Zoro flying. As Zoro fell to the ground, he realized he had to unravel the mystery surrounding Cinder. Otherwise, he had no chance of defeating this guy. Zoro lay on the ground, gasping heavily. Suddenly, he heard the sound of 3 verse lines in his ears. The Enma in his hand quietly ignited its armament haki. Then, the armament haki surged, draining the Busashoku haki from Zoro's right arm, leaving his once muscular arm as thin as a sugarcane. The sound of 3 verse lines grew increasingly urgent. Zoro stood up, releasing more Busashoku haki to counter Enma. He valiantly battled against the effects of Enma. Finally, he managed to temporarily suppress it. Cinder watched the spectacle and mocked Zoro, suggesting that Zoro's swords were having an internal conflict. Cinder attacked again, engaging in a sword clash with Zoro once more. Zoro dodged Cinder's strikes. Then, with a swift dual sword strike, he aimed for Cinder's throat. The impact of the blow felt even more powerful than striking the iron blocks of CP9 from years ago. The sensation was as if Cinder's body was not made of flesh and blood. Cinder knocked Zoro down with a single punch. He saw the confusion in Zoro's eyes. In the presence of the beast's pirates, there should be no room for confusion. Otherwise, the beast's pirates wouldn't deserve their name. In an attempt to clarify Zoro's confusion, Cinder opened his arms and gave him a chance to strike freely. If he killed Cinder, it would be on him. Zoro was furious. He felt greatly underestimated. He jumped to his feet, thrusting his sword toward Cinder's abdomen. Cinder's expression remained unchanged. A deafening explosion ensued, sending Zoro flying. The sheer power of the explosion left even someone like Zoro shaken. He realized, if his armament haki had been just a moment slower, he would have died. But strangely, Cinder emerged from the explosion unscathed. Zoro sheathed his sword and locked eyes with Jean for a few seconds. Zoro reached for his sword hilt, ready to draw it. With unwavering confidence, Zoro unleashed a powerful strike, directly slicing through Jean's mask. However, it seemed to have no effect whatsoever. That move he just used was clearly a devastating one. Zoro turned around and found himself catapulted into the air like a giant slingshot, comically clutching his head. Zoro turned to face the impending threat. He heard the voice of Sandai Kitetsu in his ear once again. His cursed sword, Enma, reacted in this life-or-death situation, absorbing Zoro's arm. Jean unleashed a black attack resembling a laser beam, coming at lightning speed, grazing Zoro's abdomen. Zoro was knocked down to Onigashima. In midair, he managed to grab Sandai Kitetsu, his first and fearsome cursed sword. Everyone feared it, but Zoro never hesitated to wield cursed swords. Even Hyogoro noticed that Sandai Kitetsu had changed its appearance, indicating it had encountered a skilled swordsman. Sandai Kitetsu was the creation of Hitetsu, while Mito Enma and the writings of the legendary swordsmith Shimatsuki Kozaburo. Does that name sound familiar to you? It should. Zoro's master was Shimatsuki Kozaburo. Zoro held onto Sandai Kitetsu in midair. Jean descended, launching Zoro spinning. Zoro got up and saw the Shimatsuki inscription sticking out in front of him. When he had first learned of the origins of Shimatsuki Kozaburo, he couldn't quite grasp it. But now, it sent shivers down his spine. Why was a sword from Wano in the east blue? Zoro drew Shimatsuki Kozaburo's blade and clashed with the incoming Jean. Amidst Jin's relentless hail of attacks, Zoro evaded while Enma continued to release haki. Memories of his training came flooding back. 13 years ago, in the Roronoa dojo, Zoro used to spar with Kurina, his master's daughter. But he often lost. One day, he went to the beach to complain to the strange old man. The old man gave Zoro an inspiring motto: abandon your name and intelligence. Zoro asked if the old man was a swordsman because everyone at the dojo said so. The old man took a deep drag of his pipe and told them to shut up, or the Marines would come running. He refused to tell Zoro anything else unless he won the dojo fight. Zoro trained relentlessly to defeat Kuina. The old man saw potential in him and gave him 2 swords he had personally forged. Given his current abilities, these were the only type of swords he could create. But Zoro was overjoyed. The old man taught Zoro that a sword was a weapon for combat, born to kill enemies. A swordsmith forged a sword to make it victorious in battle, and a sword had its own personality. The one who could make the sword obey them was the swordsman. The concept of cursed swords being dangerous was foolish. They were named swords because they frightened the weak. The old man reminisced about a sword he had forged in his youth, the best one he ever made. It had a deadly serious disposition, and you could feel its chill just by holding it. He named it after the King of Hell. Zoro stared at Enma in disbelief. The King of Hell, was that not the name of this sword? The strange old man must have been Shimatsuki Kozaburo. It turned out that the village was called Shimatsuki. Zoro only learned about the man's connection to Kuina's grandfather on the day he passed away. Later, Zoro heard that the village was founded by pirates. Tengu Yatagarasu mentioned that Shimatsuki Kozaburo had illegally left Wano over 50 years ago. Master swordsmith Shimatsuki Kozaburo, Zoro's sensei. He told Zoro that famous swords observe humans and choose their wielders, the ones they like. Thinking of these things, Zoro believed that Enma was testing him. When he picked up Enma again, he felt the straightforward nature of Enma. He had no ill intentions. He was just too weak. Could it be that Otama was like this before? Absorbed hockey by Enma while easily fighting? That would be too amazing. Zoro contemplated how to deal with Enma. Continuously releasing a large amount of hockey would lead to death. Zoro suddenly unleashed Conqueror's hockey, knocking down a group of small fries. Luffy was slightly surprised. What, you want to become the king too? Luffy and Zoro engaged in their final battle. Zoro and Luffy clashed. He slashed Luffy's abdomen with his sword. But Luffy still wasn't hurt. Luffy transformed into a thunderous war machine, strafing Zoro from the air to the ground. Zoro ran and thought at the same time. Darn it. My head itches. I need to use my brain. The flash of the cutting technique can hit him, but it's ineffective. You could say it's frustrating. But Zoro firmly believed one thing. Enma isn't invincible. He must be able to wound him. Luffy transformed into a spinning top and attacked. Zoro lowered his center of gravity to dodge, then jumped to a high place, and struck down from above. Luffy's mask was split open. Blood flowed out. Zoro confirmed his suspicion. When the flames behind Luffy disappeared, his speed would increase, but his defense would decrease. The small fries around saw Luffy's true face, and were stunned. Black wings, white hair, brown skin. Just tell the government and you can get 1 billion berries. Before the lackeys could finish speaking, Luffy slashed over with his sword. The lackeys turned into ashes. Zoro was also a little curious about Luffy's race. Luffy tore off his mask. You're a dying man. What difference does it make if you know? The two of them continued their intense battle. Zoro knew he didn't have much time left. If it dragged on too long, Enma would absorb all his haki. Zoro pointed his sword at Luffy. You guys have been sitting on that throne for long enough, step aside. Luffy replied. If you can fight, then don't talk. Kaido is the one who will become the pirate king. Zoro didn't waste any more words. He attacked directly. Luffy didn't back down either. He wielded his big sword and charged. This world only needs one king. Bring it on, Zoro. Zoro flipped in the air to avoid. Luffy swung down from a high position, pressing Zoro down and rubbing against him. Luffy's sword revealed its serrated edge. Zoro erupted with even greater strength. This time, he wouldn't let Luffy take his sword away. After a brief standoff, both of them were pushed back. Suddenly, a fire line appeared next to Zoro. Luffy rushed at an incredibly fast speed. Zoro judged. The fire behind Luffy must have been extinguished. There's no better time than now. Zoro blocked Luffy's strike. And then, with a backhand, he delivered a slash. A long gash appeared on Luffy from his chin to his abdomen. Luffy roared in anger, swinging his big sword down on Zoro. Zoro used Raging Tiger Hunt once again, and held his ground against Luffy's attack. Technically, he shouldn't have been injured. But psychologically, Luffy showed fear. He was afraid of getting hit by Zoro. Luffy swung his big sword, sending Zoro flying. Then he spread his wings and soared into the air. A flame surrounded Luffy, creating a kind of barrier. From a biological standpoint, you can't defeat him. The flames stirred up a hurricane. A powerful pressure approached Zoro. Zoro showed no fear. He charged straight at Luffy. Luffy unleashed an energy beam. The beam, enhanced by the barrier, turned into an energy cannon. Then it transformed into several fire dragons, roaring as they rushed toward Zoro. Zoro climbed along the path of the fire dragons, slashing as he charged towards Luffy. Luffy roared, and used his ultimate move. The fire dragons charged at Zoro. Zoro transformed into a dragon slayer. His swordsmanship cut through the air. The fire dragons dissipated. Luffy spat out blood and fell from the sky. With regret and remorse. Defeated. Zoro was reborn from the flames.